Hello, welcome to Miles to Go. I'm Miles O'Brien. Our conversation with a pioneer in the realm of junk news continues today. If you missed part 1, I invite you to check out episode number 12. This is lucky number 13. Although, it's okay to just start here if you like. It's not like we're missing an episode of Handmaid's Tale or Westworld or something. In the course of our 16-month investigation on junk news for the PBS NewsHour, producer Cameron Hickey and I found 26-year-old Cyrus Massoumi. He's a young man with a knack for creating blood-boiling headlines that make you want to click. This kind of content appeals to the tribal aspects of human nature. And as we all know, the results have not been pretty. To what extent are you exacerbating some real fundamental problems in this country, almost tribal problems, which could pull us apart?
Gosh, well, I mean, it would be wonderful if somebody asked other outlets that.
Maybe a better question is this. Do you classify you and your publications, your online publications, differently than mainstream media? Or is it all the same to you?
Two things. I'm currently working on a plan with two of the other largest publishers to consolidate roughly 50% of the political market, the political Facebook market, into one umbrella corporation so that we will essentially no longer have to compete with one another. And as a result of this, we will be able to deliver the public higher quality news, better written, longer pieces, higher quality, everything. To the second facet, I do think that it is not ideal to have the environment be the way that it is. Simultaneously, I mean, it's not like if Cyrus had not been the first one, like, it's like weeds. Like, there would have been another Cyrus that would have been, like 6 months down the road or a year down the road. So it's a byproduct of independent media. But also to understand, independent media is so important because, like, for example, the mainstream news sources, like, they won't do stories which contradict their ad dollars. Like, they won't do stories like against pharmaceutical companies. Like, they have sources like at the Pentagon. Like, they won't report about like Empire. It's like the list goes on and on and on and on. Independent media, on the other hand, like, we're beholden to no one. So in the early days of Mr. Conservative, I would spend thousands of dollars trying to get a story that I thought was like really important done. Like, one time I spent $10,000 getting a huge profile done on Sergeant Rob Richards. He was the guy who urinated on the dead enemy soldiers. I found out that same day, a bunch of horrible things had happened to him. Like, one of his teammates had been shot. That same day, a 5-year-old had pointed an AK-47 at him, and he had to shoot the kid, and then they helivac the kid. That same day, he had found some of his comrades' limbs hanging from trees from a blast, and it was like none of that was reported. And he was not actually charged for urinating on the bodies. He was charged for like technical violations. He was charged for not wearing his helmet while he was using his rifle, and for throwing a grenade over a wall where he could not see past it. So, like, let's say you look up and you come back down and you throw it over, right? So it's like, I spent a huge amount of money doing that. And I originally hated the guy. And then after we did the research, I was like, oh, like, wow, like, this is so much more interesting. How much money did I make off that story? Like $20.
Why?
Nobody wanted to click on it.
Why not?
Because it was interesting. I mean, because it was a good story. It wasn't like Obama, like, there's Obama, like, it's raining, like, it's Obama's fault. Like, because it was just like it wasn't designed for the drooling masses. Like, it might have worked on like 60 Minutes, where you have a captive audience who are sort of in a mood. But in the context of like the internet war, like Facebook, I mean, it speaks to the fact that Facebook wants to be something that it isn't. Like, Facebook wants to be a place where like a story like that would flourish, but it isn't. And behind closed doors, they keep making these executive decisions like, oh, well, like, what if we take all of our drooling retards and we turn them into like these intellectuals who want to read 10-page stories? Like, no, I got news for you, Facebook. Like, I've tried to write 500 words, 1,000 words, 1,500 words, 5,000 words. Like, I've tried to spend $10,000, $5,000, go and get unique stories. people don't read them. The people who are like fans of like Mr. Conservative and Occupy Democrats and Truth Examiner, they want like 250 word, like little hit them and go. Like, you know, just give me my little, like, it's like basically like a Coke addict. Like a Coke addict, like every hour, he just needs to like, you know, get that little dopamine rush. Like a fan on the conservative side or the liberal side needs to take out their phone, look at it. Trump sucks. Trump sucks so bad. All right, I'm done. And then, right? Like that's it. That's it.
People don't care about the facts.
Yeah, of course. Of course they don't. Sorry, this news? News on a news show. People don't care about facts. Take it to the bank.
So here I am toiling away with my 1,000-word stories, trying to get people to watch. It's never going to happen, is it? Right, Cyrus? I'm screwed, aren't I?
Look, man, I mean, I'm sure like there will come a day when maybe there'll be like a Renaissance revival of something, but the future is not so good. In the context of social media. I mean, people are always going to read the New York Times or the New Yorker, but like people should not make things what they are not. Like you don't go and find like a gold digger as a wife and like give her Shakespeare and be like, you know, like let's have an intellectual conversation. Facebook is not going to become something that it isn't.
What should Facebook be?
I can tell you what Facebook shouldn't be. Facebook has been doing something called the shadow ban. So let's say that there's a conservative group, like let's say a Mr. Conservative or Fox News or whatever. If you banned that group, that would be censorship, right? Now, what if instead of banning it, you reduced the reach of it 98%? Let's say that like a conservative page has 1 million fans, and every time they post a story, 100,000 people see it. After the fake news fiasco and to present day, Facebook took like, let's say that 100,000 number on the conservative side, and they took it down to 2,000 people, a 98% reduction. So for example, I have friends who are making $300,000 during the election months, each month. And I believe that they were doing $5,000 last month.
How about yourself?
I didn't get hit that bad. I mean, I shut down Mr. Conservative as a conservative business, and I switched it to primarily like posting like feel-good stories. I maintained my business on the liberal side, and on the liberal side, I've taken like, let's say like a 60% hit.
So since the election, you've found that the conservative side of things is not as lucrative?
This is universal. There has been a shadow ban. So Facebook is avoiding a PR dilemma by shadow banning.
So conservative content won't cut through the algorithm and get into the feed. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. The cost of just even having like 1 or 2 writers, it would be a net loss to keep running those pages.
So is Facebook, for all intents and purposes, censoring?
Yeah. Oh, like, I mean, beyond a shadow of a doubt. They took millions of dollars from publishers and they put out guidelines, and publishers followed those guidelines, and they still did this. I've spent like over $1 million on Facebook. Like I'm probably close to 2 actually. And like I have friends that have spent way more than that. We don't even have like anybody to email or call at Facebook after spending millions of dollars and having our like 90 to 98% reductions in profitability. I mean, could you imagine if like you did this special and 98% less people than usual watched it? Like you would basically be like, well, like were the airwaves down? There is no way to call it but censorship. Like shadow ban is just like a silly term. If the public knew that like over 50% of the conservative market on Facebook has literally shut itself down now, if they had been banned, everybody would be furious. But they've done it in this very clever way.
There's not a lot of transparency there.
There's zero transparency with Facebook. I can't even call Facebook. Like nobody can reach Facebook. Like I know like one journalist who can like maybe get a response after a few days from like Mark Zuckerberg's assistant.
You describe yourself as patient zero, pioneer, whatever you want to call it. By the time you get to the election season, fake news, junk news, whatever you want to call it, became ubiquitous. What was that like?
No.
Tell me what I misunderstood there.
There were about a dozen stories which were fake, which were extremely viral. For example, some of them that people will remember, like the Pope endorses Trump, Denzel Washington endorses Trump, things like that. Like the people that reached had already made up their mind, okay? So if we can just cast that aside and say like, okay, like those might have been super viral, but like the people that they reached, it didn't convert anybody. A critique that they have done of that, the rebuttal that people like to say is, well, it was part of an ecosystem of fake news. Well, no, there's not an ecosystem of fake news. There's an ecosystem of misleading news. But misleading news is just CNN or Fox, okay? CNN and Fox, try switching between the channels. Nothing to do with one another. So both of those are misleading. So when you talk about an ecosystem of fake or junk news, no, there were like a dozen super viral fake stories, and there's an ecosystem of misleading news, and that ecosystem of misleading news may be more partisan than like CNN or Fox, but that's by design. I mean, people just want something which is more partisan on their phone, like for a quick read, right? I mean, like, if you have an hour to listen to Hannity, then you have an hour to get angry. If you only have 2 minutes, then you only have 2 minutes to get angry. So it's really just a matter of economics.
Would you then say you're just part of a spectrum here of misleading outlets?
No, so there is a scale where you start in the middle as like just balanced, tilted, then there's clickbait, then there's misleading, and then there's fake. And what Facebook has done is that they've hired people who they claim are objective, right? So they went and they hired liberal fact checkers, okay, from like PolitiFact and Washington Post and whatever. And they said, monitor this. And these are people who have no understanding of this, right? Basically, they said, here's the problem over here. These are not what they wanted to eliminate.
Outright falsehoods is what they're after, right?
When Rachel Maddow does a report, or Jake Tapper, or Tucker Carlson, and they just exclude all of the information you don't like, there isn't some hysteria in the media to go like, well, we need to start a petition so that they include all of the information on the other side. It's like, no, like this is like a partisan show. Like, you know what you're buying into. Like, if you want objective, don't go to like ABC or CBS because those are just as liberal, but go like watch C-SPAN or something, or just like die. Like, then you'll get like really objective news.
Junk fake. There was a term you used a little while ago I want you to just expand on. You talked about the fake news fiasco. What do you mean by that?
If you were someone who thought that there was a 97% chance that Hillary was going to win, and then she lost, fake news was just one perfect part of an explanation to explain your new reality. Because let's say you live in San Francisco, LA, New York, Chicago, Boston. If Trump just won and there were not tertiary explanations, then you would have to accept. I mean, how uncomfortable would you feel knowing that like you live in New York and that as soon as you drive 40 miles outside of New York, like 97% of the landmass of the country that you live in completely disagrees with you. So then you look at like the recipe and you're like, well, if there's fake news and there's like Russian collusion and there's, like vote tampering and there was like voter suppression, like these are all things which then sort of make your reality start making sense again. And so fake news fiasco was just like a perfect moment to go, well, of course Hillary lost. It's not that she was the worst candidate in history. It's not that the polling showed that Bernie Sanders, the polling that they hid, that he would have beat Trump. Like, okay, it's that like this amazing Hillary, she was slandered. The Russians spent somewhere between 500,000 to $1 million, right? Hillary spent $1 billion, okay? If there's an advertising guy in Russia who can win when Hillary spends $1 billion and you spend $1 million, he should move here and be the chief marketing guy at like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, because the guy's a beast, okay? Like, he's better than me, and that's like saying a lot. Because again, I spent more money than him. Like, it's just, how can you reconcile your reality? Because the only other way would be like, I'm living in a reality which I don't recognize. Like, this is not my country. And it's so much easier to be like, oh, well, no, this is my country. It's just that my poor fellow countrymen, like they were manipulated and lied to.
We're looking for excuses? Is that what you're saying? We want to point the finger somewhere?
Yeah, because what's the alternative? The alternative is that you live in like the real alternative is that you live in a country which has been savaged by automation savaged by like the coming AI, savaged by outsourcing, savaged by drugs, savaged by illegal immigration. But don't point the finger at any of these things. Like, point the finger like across the aisle, right? Like look for the false problems. Like don't look for the real problems. And so what did Trump say? Trump had a Western cultural nationalist message, while as Bernie Sanders had a European socialist message. Both of these are essentially very similar. The primary difference is that Trump's has to do with a not white identity, which is what is often confused in the liberal media, but a cultural identity. An idea like Theodore Roosevelt said that we should have like one language, one culture, one people, one flag, like undivided, that there could be no half-hearted Americanism. The reason that Trump is so hated is not because of, the tape where he talked about grabbing or, anything else. It's because he's not ashamed to say my team's the best. While as Hillary didn't really have a message. Her message was just like anti-Trump, lots of like political TV commercial ads, and that like, we're stronger together. And then they say like diversity is our strength. And then with the other fist, they go, and we're all equal. And then I reply, but if we're all equal, then how can diversity be our strength? Because that's a logical fallacy, because equal parts, it wouldn't matter how many you had if they were actually equal. It's just a pile of bricks. They're all equal. So logical fallacy.
How good are the Russians? How much of an impact did they have on the election, do you think? And how much will they have on the midterm elections coming up?
In my personal view, as someone who, I don't say this as like someone who just like adores Trump for pissing off liberals. I say this just as like a guy who's actually probably read much more on it than, probably even most journalists that are looking into it. Negligible.
Didn't move the needle.
How do you move the needle with $500,000?
Did you move the needle?
No, because I was targeting people who were already, it's cheapest to target people who already have a bent. So like it'll say like, very conservative or very liberal, right? And targeting those people is cheap. Now targeting independents is like 25 times more expensive. So if you spend like $500,000 targeting like those independents, you would get nowhere, which is why nobody does it. Like you target the people, on the periphery, and then maybe like they have like friends that they might share to. Okay.
So this is a corollary to anger cells. The people who are angry are the ones at the edge of the spectrum.
Right. But okay. And like, let's take like the argument to like the next degree. So I just said like, it would be cheaper. So let's say like the Russians tried to influence the election and they spent $500,000 to $1 million targeting the very conservatives, the people that would be cheap to target, thinking like, well, these people are going to get angry and then share their news with their independent friends. The only argument that you could make. Okay. How is that million that they spent any different than the million that I spent? And how is it any different than like the hundreds of millions of dollars that the RNC spent or that the Trump campaign spent?
So you don't think you had any influence on the election?
No, I think that like if a steak has 1,000 calories and you cut off 1 calorie of that steak and said like, did you eat that steak? My answer would be no, but obviously, yeah, theoretically I ate the steak, but would you notice that like 1 calorie of your 1,000 calorie steak would like, no, like, obviously like I took a pebble off of the beach, but is the beach still the same? The beach is still there. And I don't even like, it's silly. It's pure silly. Yes, I had an effect, but it was like to call it negligible would be an insult to the word negligible.
So you're offering up red meat to the people who like to eat meat.
I'm in the business now of giving news to liberal people, and I don't view that as a contradiction because they
like red meat too. I'm just saying red political.
I thought they liked tofu and stuff.
The red meat meaning taking aside their desire for meat or not. You're offering up the kind of political fare that people on the edges want.
Doesn't everything everywhere do that? Like, doesn't E! Entertainment give you red political meat? Is there anything on a media device which is not red meat in its category?
All right, so it's good for business. How did you do through the election?
We did very, very well, but we spent all of it growing.
So, this was not 7 figures. This was...
So like for me, like a normal year would be like, I don't know, like 250 like to 325. And I think probably like last year was like soft 6 figures.
So the election wasn't good?
No, it was that like, you make 150,000, but you've already got like, 800,000 in advertising expense that you fronted.
So your expenses were higher for some reason?
So I spent like let's say $1 million buying fans, right? And then for like a few months during the election, like, you make 150. Like, well, you got to pay down like that $1 million that you spent buying all those fans, right? So like if there's another election and like I'm not buying fans, and I'll pocket that. But I mean, I'm saying like my expenses were huge. I bought over 10 million. We did over 10 million fan purchases this last year. It's a lot of fan purchases.
I should say.
Just in time for Facebook to totally F me over.
Well, I want to talk about that in a minute, but just the day after the election, did that fundamentally change your whole business model?
Well, I was too busy like celebrating, watching like recaps of the election night meltdowns.
All right, so 2 days later, when after the hangover or whatever, did it occur to you that the business model had changed? Or when did it dawn upon you?
I was merely upset because my business partner, I told my business partner probably very, very early in election year, I said, we should buy liberal. Okay. And it took probably like 6 to 8 months before he was like, you know what, like, why don't we try like buying liberal? And
so this is like a hedge fund.
You won't meet somebody who loves politics more than me, but sure. I mean, like literally 12 hours a day. Okay. But anyway, I was just sad because it was like, I was like, thank God, like this is going to be amazing. Like this is going to be great for business. And it's just going to be like the best, like it's like a 4-year-long movie, like watching the news. I watch Morning Joe and it is better than like going to the movie theater. But I was just angry that we didn't buy like, I don't know, like 10 million more liberals or something. Like that would have been awesome.
So you're buying liberals now?
As of now, nobody on the liberal or conservative side is buying anything.
Why not?
Because everybody is terrified of what Facebook is doing. When I like to refer to Facebook algorithm changes, I call it the blind angry monkey, because I envision that the executives, I don't actually think there are executives at Facebook. I think there is a control room and there is a blind angry monkey in a cage. And sometimes Zuckerberg hits a button and he gets out and he starts messing with all the controls and then it just goes haywire. That's what it feels like to be on the receiving end of their algorithm changes, because they put out like an eloquent blog post where they're like, do this, 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 and then you do that. Blind angry monkey comes out, finished. Like your traffic's down like 80%, and then like every month you go up to like 10%, 10%, 10%. Blind angry monkey comes out again, like you've been doing everything right, then your life's over again.
Facebook is now something that it probably never imagined it would be, given the amount of traffic that goes through there. It's become the de facto public square. Does it owe all of us something different? It is, after all, a business.
Well, should Facebook be a public utility?
I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Was that your question?
The question is, has Facebook become something more than just a private enterprise? Is it the de facto public square? And if that is the case, does it owe our democracy something more?
I think that we have reached a juncture where there has to be, all right, 2 things. One, there needs to be some form of oversight to stop this shadow banning, right? Like you can't just have organizations be shadow banned, basically have their businesses shut down without the public knowing, right?
And that's what's happening.
Oh, it's happened. Yeah, conservative side, gone on Facebook. Like you could be following like 100 conservative pages and like you just, like all the time, like, on Twitter or Facebook, like I think I'm following a page. I'm like, I haven't seen their stuff in forever. And then I go there and it's like, I even have it priorityed. And actually even on the liberal side, like it happens, but less, way less, because they're just trying to favor places that they want their brand to be commensurate with. Like they want, New York Times, Washington Post, which I've tried to explain to people, that's not what people want to read on Facebook. So first thing, there needs to basically be some sort of oversight of the way in which the news feed is managed. So like you can't just engage in like censorship without there being any knowledge or recourse. Second thing, there needs to be a dialogue, not by the executive team at Facebook, but collectively, perhaps amongst intellectuals, experts, society, the talk shows, in which we say, what should Facebook be? Because on one hand, we have like, what would Facebook be if there were no rules to the algorithm, which decides what shows up? And so Facebook has to make, like, let's say, some executive decisions. But then beyond those basic executive decisions, if they're going to say like, you know what, like we don't like certain types of news, we only want like what we think is highbrow because that's commensurate with our brand, then I think that that's a debate which should be had in public, where people should be aware that what is essentially the largest media utility in the world. Yeah, it is the largest media utility. Definitely should happen in public.
It's kind of like decisions are made in the proverbial smoke-filled room. Should there be like some sort of nonprofit public trust that manages the algorithm at Facebook?
I wouldn't call it that because like it is their business, like they are a private business. It's just that like, and it's not just Facebook. I'll put it to you like this. Like if you are banned from Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, right? Your First Amendment rights have essentially been abridged. And I know that that's sort of like a more modern interpretation of the Constitution, but you have no right to sort of engage with your fellow citizens or complain against your government if you don't have venues to complain on social media any longer. Like, what are you going to do? Write letters to like your congressman in comparison to like what is actually available? So all I can do is sound the alarm. I don't think it's my place as a publisher to tell people like what it should be, but I think that people should realize that like I'm sounding the alarm. There is shadow banning, like there is censorship, and I've seen it happen on both Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. It's also happening on YouTube. And if we keep going down this road, like very, very bad things will happen in my mind.
Like what?
Well, I'll give you an example. Like everybody's like, on one side you have like fake news, and then on the other side you have like the fear of like Nazis, but like the definition of what a Nazi is, it's like really become broad. So like let's say like you label somebody a Nazi and they tweet something or post something on Facebook. There's like a mob of Antifa and social justice warrior activists, and these are people who wear masks when they go out in public, so like they can never be identified, but they will get these people fired. So like let's just say like somebody like me. I think that being transsexual is a mental disorder, right? Which was an uncontroversial view 15 years ago. And I say, I think it should be illegal to give children under the age of 13 hormone blockers, which castrates them, if I say those two things. And I had a job working at a law firm. And now they contact my law firm and they get me fired. And not only do they get me fired, but like now when you Google my name, that's like the only thing that comes up. Now, like I have to go down the rabbit hole of like maybe like becoming an activist in like a Nazi group. By pushing people out of the public square for controversial views in the way that like Facebook is doing as a corporation and activists are doing as individuals, is forcing people to become more radical than they ever would have been if you actually took their ideas on intellectually.
Let's talk a little bit about the business as it is. Oh, by the way, I should tell you, you keep talking about the shadow banning. Just anecdotally, the PBS NewsHour site has had a dramatic drop-off in traffic. So it's affecting things across the board. Now, you would probably classify that on the liberal side of things.
Right.
But the tinkering with the algorithm is affecting a lot of businesses all over the place right now.
So I'll put it to you like this. If there is a change and the liberal side goes down 60% and the conservative side goes down 98%, I don't think that it's fair to make comparisons.
Well, I'm just trying to tell you, it's not just...
No, I know, because the liberal side went down too. But the liberal side, you can still run a business on the liberal side. You can't run a business when you're 98% down.
You've hopped over the political fence here because this is where the business model is right now. Describe how this business compares to what it was like before.
I'm very excited to speak about this. So I grew up with Bill Maher, as I said previously, as my political god. And it was
So you grew up a liberal? Or just liked him because you liked the way he formed a thought?
Well, Bill Maher is sort of a very free-thinking intellectual, or at least he was until recently. He hated the Iraq War, and I hated the Iraq War. And so I think that, you know, his free-thinking views in certain regards, he was fresh 10 years ago. He was fresh and interesting. And I feel sort of a genetic need to oppose those in power, like cellular. The conservative side really became trashy. And I actually like hated looking at Mr. Conservative for like a few years there. On the other hand, the liberal side, I like reading the articles. And when I look at what the Trump administration is doing, like whether I agree with a certain policy or not, or whether it's like a ridiculous Trump tweet, those things need to be covered. And I really enjoy that I have a business where I'm able to pay people who can cover these things because people need to know. So my staff, my editor-in-chief is a master's in economics from Columbia, and my staff writer is an English professor. I believe he taught at Drexel. So it's a very qualified staff. They're very, very good at what they do, and I'm thrilled that we are able to cover things in a way that I never was on Mr. Conservative. Like Mr. Conservative was always inflammatory, but never fake, because there are distinctions. Always, inflammatory, like excluding facts from the other side, but never fake. The difference is that in what I do now, my team, they don't cover news angles which are favorable to opposition in the same way that CNN would never cover a favorable angle to Trump, or MSNBC. It's like if he has a great day, like they just find I have no idea how they find the stories that are like some bizarre side story. But the point is that I am proud of my team, and I'm proud of the site. Unfortunately, there's problems with the Facebook algorithm as of now, but I'm very excited to grow over the next 3 years, ideally into the largest liberal social media presence in the country.
So you're a mercenary.
I don't know if I owned Ben and Jerry's and I didn't like ice cream. Would you call me a mercenary?
There is a certain apolitical nature to what you do here. You're political.
I
what's the way
love
to describe
politics.
it? Yeah, is it? You make no apologies for hopping on the other side in this case, because that's where the money is.
I would make apologies if I did something on either side which was not of quality.
You say you do high quality?
On Truth Examiner?
Yeah.
Yes. In the context of what is available to me.
Well, explain that then, in the context of what is available.
Okay, so if New York Times and Washington Post sent me an email, Bezos and whoever, and they were like, you can copy all of our articles and just post them on Truth Examiner, I would say like, no thanks. Like, I can't use them. Because when people are on their phones, they don't want to read those articles on Facebook. So what I do in the context of Facebook is exactly what people on Facebook want. Like, they aren't you. And like, they aren't, like normal, like intellectuals from New York or wherever. Like, they aren't New York Times readers necessarily. Like, maybe some of them are, but the majority of them just want a 250 to 350 word article, which will sort of like, get them a little bit fired up. So in the context of what's available to me, I produce the best possible product.
Is the business any different now that you're coming at it from the other direction?
There is much more anger. There was always more anger on the conservative side. I've attributed that to two reasons. I was on the conservative side first, so a lot of people followed my lead and copied me, and a byproduct of that competition was more animosity. Secondly, I think that conservatives, due to the inherent nature sociologically between liberal and conservative people, these are inherent. Like, if you actually look at like genetics, there's differences between these people, and conservatives are angrier people. Like, they are more prone to anger. Like, they prefer the emotion of anger. I don't like, not like, let's just say like 60-40 or 70-30. It doesn't mean like 90-10.
And liberals do not.
Again, it's like a 60-40. I don't know if it's like 51-49, but there is, to a degree, conservatives, and I don't think it's a small one, to a degree, conservatives thrive off of anger in a way which is unique to them relative to the American liberal.
So business is not as good.
Like, liberals like to mock things, and liberals like to laugh at things. And Trump is easy to mock and to laugh at. So like, business is great in that sense, like the umbrella moments, or like, Trump being a goofball. It's just a different set of emotions. And it doesn't mean that it's 100-0. I mean, it's just, there's just different preferences. And I would say that like, it's like during the election, for example, like I believe that the profit margins were commensurate across both sides. Like, each fan was delivering. So we were driving the same amount of traffic per fan on the liberal and conservative side, but for some reason, the advertising revenue is like about 30% lower on liberals than conservatives.
Why is that?
Let's say 1,000 conservatives come to your page, you would make $10 CPM. That's per 1,000 impressions. And if 1,000 liberals came, like let's say you'd make $6.50.
Who's setting that rate, and why is that?
It's like Google and advertising companies.
They don't spend as much?
It has less to do with like spending rather than like demographic differences, or like primarily demographic differences. Like let's say like conservative side is more men, liberal side is more women. Maybe like there's more like car ads showing to like the guys, and like, you know, something which was more like to do with a consumer product to like the woman. And I mean, there's 100 different ways to come at it, but I mean, they're both basically the same age. The only thing that I could tell you is definitively different about them is just the slight skew, 20% in sex demographic.
I suspect you want your conservative business back, right?
No.
No.
Zero desire.
Why?
Because at the end, I hated it.
Lucrative.
Sure.
That's not enough?
Everybody's got to look at themselves when they shave in the morning. I think I heard that somewhere, which is probably why I don't shave anymore. But it doesn't make me feel good. And I've made a lot of money in my own times. And I don't think that like another 20,000 a month, like on top would, like, I'm sure it would, you know, be nice and whatnot, but it's not worth it.
So you're not making that much money now?
I mean, I'm in the top 1% of my age, like maybe even, I'm probably in like the quartile percentage of my age, top quartile percentage of my age. I was told it was rude to talk about money, but I do love money.
How old are you now?
26.
26. You've made a lot of money for a 26-year-old.
Well, I never gave an exact amount.
What would be the amount?
It would be in the 7 figures, but it wouldn't be in the high 7 figures. It would be in the low 7 figures.
Could you have predicted that when you were selling T-shirts in high school?
Gosh, I would have thought it was more, honestly, because it's really disappointing how I feel as if I would have honestly made more money if I had gone some other path.
Like what?
I was actually really interested in blockchain the same year that I got into Facebook.
Maybe there's a way to combine the two.
Actually, there is blockchain technology, like, which is looking to create a decentralized version of Facebook so that the data is no longer centralized. It's called like Redcoin, for example. So instead of like Facebook making all the money, like there's decentralized blockchain versions where the users actually make the advertising revenue and all the privacy is kept locally.
And this is an important point. We take almost as a given that, Facebook and Google and YouTube combined are a monopoly that will live forever, but there's not a lot of Kodak film around anymore.
Yeah, 10 years ago.
I mean, I guess the question is, do you think ultimately people will vote with their feet and move out of Facebook because they're not getting what they want?
10 years ago, YouTube wasn't really a thing.
Right.
And I think that these companies, look at Google right now, all right? On one side, they're being sued by feminists because they won't hire enough women. On the other side, they're being sued by white men because they fired a white guy for saying that there's biological differences between men and women. These tech companies have cornered themselves in more ways than they can imagine. I don't think that they realize in what a bad position they've put themselves in when they are so ideological and are doing so many things wrong. And it's only going to be so long until they overreach because they are at the precipice. Right now, these problems are primarily problems that intellectuals are concerned with. I believe that they're going to do things which activists will be fine with, but which normal people will have large issues with. For example, there's PewDiePie. He's one like the most popular YouTube personality, but there are activists on the fringes who are calling him for him to be banned and calling him a Nazi, and they've had many of his videos demonetized. As soon as these activists start to overstep, and who knows how far they'll overstep, because no one's ever going to stand up to them. I mean, they're paper tigers. Like these activists, like, they're going to send an email and like, maybe they'll get in their little like black outfits and like yell at you, but like they haven't killed anybody. Like they haven't done anything bad, but they're like tyrants. And like at some point, like some CEO or some famous person is just going to have to like flip them the bird and be like, hey, get out of here. Cause like, I don't care. Like this is my speech rights. Like this is what I'm going to do. I don't think that a CEO even realizes how much praise he would get if he just said, like, this is a free speech platform and hate speech is not violent speech. Like, hate speech, like, why would you have a First Amendment if it wasn't supposed to include hate speech? You wouldn't need the First Amendment if it was not inclusive of hate speech. There would be no point. It would be like, did they write it so that, like, you know, Thomas Jefferson could tell Benjamin Franklin, like, hey, bud, like, my favorite color is blue and I like to fish. Like, is that what the First Amendment's for? Like, no, it's to say things like back then, like, a black person is, like, less than a human. That's like hate speech, right? Is that not hate speech? Like, that was in the First Amendment. Like, there was no law going like, oh, did you just, like, say that controversial thing about African people? Like, we're gonna fire you now. Like, no chance of you being in the legislature. No, of course not. Like, this is, it's absurd. It's absurd that fake news and hate speech, this dumb Russia thing, are at the forefront of our public discussion, when meanwhile, like, our country is, in my mind, like, within 20 years, like, at a point where we're going to reach 20% systemic unemployment, and we're going to have a fundamental reconfiguration of our entire social structure.
Cyrus, you have kind of a dark view of where we're headed in this country.
Well, how could we not have 20% systemic unemployment when you have artificial intelligence, which would take away the jobs of secretaries and people with repetitive tasks, and like, once all of the Uber drivers are gone?
I'm thinking a little bigger. It's a dark view. You're angry. Why are you angry?
I'm not angry.
No?
I mean, what am I angry about? Like, I love my life. I love to cook. Like, I love to walk my dog. Like, I'm working on a garden. Like, I love to do archery. I love going out. My days are filled with, like, laughing. It's just that a lot of the laughing I do is political, and I laugh at a lot of liberals. So, yeah, like, I mean, I'm angry at those people, but, like, 90% of the time I'm just laughing at them. Here, tell you what, I would never go protest a liberal rally. Whoever you like, I don't even know how many people you like. There is not one person that you like who, if they were giving a speech outside my door, I'd go protest, okay? But people, like, I don't know if you have kids, but, like, let's say, like, you know, people, or what, you know, just younger people, they would come protest, like, pretty much everybody I like. And you're asking me, like, Cyrus, why are you angry? Why don't you ask, like, them why they're angry? Like, I'm not shutting down speeches. I don't bust down windows. I don't burn stuff in Berkeley. Like, I'm not Antifa. I don't wear all black. I don't pepper spray people. I just have some intellectual views, and I'd like to, like, sit across the table with my opponents and argue them. That doesn't make me an angry person. That makes me, like, a person who's intrigued by thought.
Okay, so do you consider yourself a journalist in any way?
Not as an occupation, no.
Well, I mean, you seem to care about journalism in some way.
Yeah, I mean, I care about it from, like, I don't know, like, do you consider, like, the CEO of PBS a journalist?
Well, you know, in the context of publishing, you might say that.
No, I'm asking, like, do you consider, like, do you consider, like, Zucker, or, like, the CEO of PBS, or, like, Ailes, like, Roger Ailes? Like, I'm asking, like, do you consider the people on the executive side who aren't?
There's a very, you know, squishy definition of what a journalist is or is not, and certainly that's changing as we speak, right? And you might be...
Like, I've paid for journalism to be produced. I've never produced a work of journalism.
Are you a publisher for our era? Do you represent a new generation, a new way of thinking about publishing information?
Yeah, but I think that this is a leading question, because I think that this is most likely going to come with the second question being, like, what have you published of substance? To which I would answer, my goal with my outlet is that once we would make more money, to hire more people to do more original content. It's just that the only reason that we don't is because, like, financially, that's just not how the books work.
So you're taking somebody else's work and tweaking it to make it appeal to a specific audience. It's as simple as that.
Right, like, as does everybody else in the media.
Not everybody. There are people who go out and do stories. There are people who actually go out and do the work initially. Somebody has to go out and do the story. The original story, somewhere along the way, gets written by somebody who actually isn't aggregating or derivative, right?
Right, but there are a tremendous amount of outlets which do aggregation.
I'm not doubting that. I'm just
okay,
saying, what
sure.
I'm saying is there, I mean...
Yeah, there are people, like, out, like, in the Middle East, or, you know, like, out at the White House, like, gathering the quotes, or, yeah, whatever. Like,
well, I flew across the country to come here and interview. That's actually doing the work of journalism. There are people who do this still.
Right.
Okay? And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Because without it, you'd have nothing.
No, I completely disagree with you.
What would you have?
So you flew across the country and you have two producers here to interview me. What would happen in my media is that we would get on Skype and we would do an interview and it would last an hour and it would cost me like nothing to produce. So that's why like your media is going to die and like mine's going to thrive. And I don't mean that in an insulting way. I just mean like in 10 years, you guys won't be around and I will.
So what will that be like in 10 years? I
imagine we'll have tons more media to watch.
Really? Tell me, but what would it be like though?
I watch that media all day and it's like way more valuable to me than, I mean, not PBS, but like I don't even watch cable news anymore.
So, all right, let's march forward. Midterm elections coming up.
But you disagree? I mean, like...
What, disagree on what?
Okay, so like, here's an example. Like, if I had been sitting, in front of my computer with like a 4K camera and you had been sitting in front of your computer with a 4K camera, like you think that like we couldn't have done an hour interview?
Yeah, it wouldn't have been as much fun as coming out to meet you though.
No, I agree. I completely agree.
At a certain point,
but I mean, like, I think that you are trying to make a point that like without this, like that this couldn't have happened.
There is good journalism that's done on the phone or on Skype or any number of other ways, but it's actually picking up the phone and reaching out to people and talking to people as opposed to taking someone's work and putting a headline on it that is going to grab attention. That's all I'm saying. There's a difference there, right?
But simultaneously, I mean, if you look at the stories which I take and do that to, there's like 50 other outlets which I imagine, go to like award ceremonies with who do that exact same thing to those stories.
Your defense that other people do it doesn't really wash. Your defense that, well, other people do it, it's okay. That's kind of, that's not a very good response. You know that. Right?
Well, in this case it is. I mean, if other people murdered, like it wouldn't be a good defense, but in this case, it's a fine defense. I think that you're trying to single me out as like a bad actor when in reality, like I'm no worse an actor than some of your compatriots.
Not singling you out. You're representing a group of people that do this. Let's talk a little bit about the midterm election.
Sure.
To what extent do you think junk news will come into play as the election comes near?
Nominal.
Why?
Because it's been significantly diminished through the Facebook algorithm.
Just because of that?
Well, I mean, like, I thought, what were we talking about on the context of Facebook? Because, I mean, that's like...
I was talking about the big picture, the whole...
Well, I mean, that's like, it only propagates itself through social media.
Right, okay. So it's over.
No, it's not over. I mean, it's like weeds. There will always be new avenues for marketers. I think that the age of news publishers, basically there being a newsroom and like some big guy with a big desk and like he's going to be the one that like controls what information the public sees. Like, no, like that's like a bygone era. Like the new age is where marketer is king, and that marketer needs good journalists and writers on his team, but marketer is king now. It's not about editor, like whoever sat in that, big office at New York Times or Washington Post or whatever.
You're a marketer.
Yeah.
Are you king?
Not yet.
You will be?
I would love to have a media empire. That is my life's goal, but I have 35 years to go.
So what's the next step for you?
Before 2020, I would like to make the most attractive liberal outlet on social media. So, like I'm working with some other publishers to like conjoin our holdings, which would give me 15 million liberal fans altogether, which would, I believe, make me the largest holder of liberal Facebook fans. At that point, I would spend more money on editorial, making original pieces, as journalists do most likely. I don't think we would hire journalists, but we would hire columnists, simply because of the fact that, having people fly around relative, we want to have a breaking news and we want to have opinion columns. Produce original video, which people will find interesting, that'll go viral. And then come 2020, I'll either continue to work on that or I'll sell it. And then I'll move on to the next media project until I become your next Rupert Murdoch.
Is that where you're headed?
Debatable. I don't know.
What does this empire look like?
It's online, it's a video. I mean, right now it's text and we've got images and we've got video. And what do we have upcoming? We probably have lenses where we'll probably see stories. So instead of watching so right now, I'm primarily text-based. And like we're moving more and more video. So like the next step will be like, an optical view of that video so that, your 3D or whatever in it, you can actually like see around the opinion desk or whatever that you're looking at. And like, let's say that they take you to like a bombing place. Like, oh, here was the bombing. Like, and you can actually like, like look around and be like, oh, whoa, like, like that kind of thing. Like that's the next evolution. And that would be like really cool, right? So then instead of having like your phone or you're reading stuff on your phone, like now like you're probably just gonna like have, some sort of chip and like you engage with the news stories that way. So like, and then what comes after that? Like, I don't know.
That sounds a little more elaborate than taking a wire service report and dressing up the headline to offer some red meat.
Yeah, I mean, you asked me where it was going. You didn't ask me where it is.
Well, no, I mean, getting to there is a whole different thing, right?
Well, I mean, not necessarily. I mean, you'd be surprised how quickly like these things can fall into line. I mean, if I make this deal happen and I am the biggest holder of liberal assets, like then it'll be fairly easy to move very quickly. I have a long track record behind me of success. I've never failed at a project.
So a hardcore conservative might very well be the largest holder of liberal assets online in the social networking world. That's kind of interesting.
I'm not a hardcore conservative. How am I a hardcore conservative?
Okay, well, you don't consider yourself conservative? I thought you said somewhere along the way you said you were conservative, no?
I'm a cultural libertarian. I'm against empire. I'm against immigration, unlawful immigration. I'm very pro-immigration. I'm against taxes. I don't like hefty taxes. I believe in taking care of your fellow man, but I'm not sure how much the government should be responsible for that. It would be difficult for me to call me a conservative when I'm against empire, and I think that in most events, like I'm not like a Blue Lives Matter person. Like I oftentimes take like the defense of like somebody who was shot unlawfully by the police. Like I would never have like hungry children in America. I believe in common goodness. I'm not like some cold-hearted McConnell or Paul Ryan. Like they're just like, I think even McCain's brain tumor wants to bomb countries. So no, I'm not a hardcore conservative. I'm a free thinker who loves politics and loves media.
And you don't think it's at all ironic that a person with that description would be the holder of the most followers on the liberal side of things?
Well, my editor-in-chief is a diehard Hillary fan, and I've never told her to take down a story or choose a story.
All right, so what are the consequences, the big picture consequences to our democracy of all of this?
Fake news, Russia, what?
Junk news, fake news, whatever you want to call it. What you've started has snowballed, correct? And it has consequences.
You shouldn't ask like the guy who, designed a nuclear bomb, like what the ethical implications of bombing a city are. I'm not here to talk about ethical consequences. I'm a marketer. I'm an excellent marketer. I would put my marketing skills against anybody. I'm not here to talk about ethics. I have lots of ethical concerns. I just don't think that in the context of an interview, I should be a subject matter expert on the ethical implications of information transmission in this age.
Well, as you probably know, Robert Oppenheimer had tremendous misgivings about the bomb he created.
I'm not him.
And you have a clear conscience.
I don't have a clear conscience.
You don't?
About previous work that I've done, like my conservative work. I think that my liberal work is great. I think that some of my conservative work was great.
Thank you very much, Cyrus Massoumi. It was quite a visit and really a fascinating interview. We'll keep you posted on his efforts to become a media mogul in a new era. And on that subject, how about helping me achieve a measure of moguldom? I'd love to figure out a way to monetize these podcasts one way or another. And you can help just by reviewing it, rating it. Maybe the powers that be will be inclined to help me find an audience. In the meantime, check out my website. You can always see what I'm up to and stay up to date on the world of science and technology in general. And while you're there, go ahead and sign up for the newsletter. We won't spam you. We won't use any of your information, none of that stuff. And we certainly won't be sending you any hyper-partisan or false news. MilesO'Brien.com is the place to go. I'm Miles O'Brien. This has been Miles to Go. Thanks for listening.